This 4-year-old beggar girl was crying on the sidewalk outside McDonald's while people threw scraps of food at her, until a millionaire saw everything. You won't believe what he did. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is greatly appreciated. The scorching sun of the Arizona desert beat down on Main Street in Scottsdale that Tuesday. In front of McDonald's, Isabella, a girl of just 6 years old, huddled on the sidewalk, her clothes tattered and her hair matted, a testament to days of neglect. Her large, expressive brown eyes watched sadly as people passed by, some averting their gaze, others simply ignoring her. That afternoon, a group of teenagers approached, laughing and talking loudly. One of them, wearing an expensive designer t-shirt, stopped in front of her with a half-finished milkshake. "Hey, little bum, want some?" he sneered while the others laughed. Before Isabella could react, he turned the cup over, pouring the cold drink on her. Tears began to run down her dirty face, mixing with the sticky liquid. It was at that moment that a black Escalade screeched to a halt near the curb. From the car stepped Theodore Ted Mitchell, 52, owner of a regional chain of gas stations. Tall, with graying hair and a stern expression, he had just left a tense meeting with suppliers when he witnessed the scene. "What do you think you're doing?" His deep, authoritative voice made the teenagers freeze. "You think this is funny? Bullying a child?" The group quickly dispersed, leaving only the echo of their nervous laughter. Ted approached Isabella, who instinctively cowered even further. He knelt down, ignoring the fact that his custom-tailored Italian suit pants were touching the dirty ground. "Don't be afraid," he said, softening his voice. "You must be hungry." The girl did not respond, but her stomach rumbled audibly. It had been days since she had had a proper meal. Ted got up and went into McDonald's, returning minutes later with a tray full of food. He sat down next to her on the sidewalk, ignoring the curious glances of passers-by. As Isabella ate greedily, Ted observed her delicate features, which even beneath the dirt painfully reminded him of his late wife, Claire. It had been 3 years since she had passed away, leaving a void that seemed impossible to fill. Since then, he had become known not only for his gas station empire, but also for his explosive temper and the melancholy he carried in his eyes. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Isabella," she replied, almost in a whisper, speaking for the first time. "Where's your mum, Isabella?" The girl lowered her eyes, her small hands gripping the hamburger tightly. "I don't know," she murmured. "I haven't seen her in a while." Ted felt something awaken inside him, a mixture of compassion and outrage. How could anyone abandon a child like that? In his mansion in the upscale neighborhood of Paradise Valley, his sister Evelyn, 48, was waiting for him for a meeting about the family business. But for the first time in a long time, the numbers and spreadsheets seemed insignificant. "Do you want to tell me more?" he insisted softly. Isabella hesitated, but something about the calm presence of this man made her feel safe. Between bites of the hamburger, she told him about her mother, Pam Sanders, who worked in a shoe factory until she lost her job. After that, everything changed. Pam began to act strangely, sometimes aggressive, sometimes absent. Until one day, she simply didn't come home. As he listened, Ted felt his heart clench. For 2 months, Isabella had been living on the streets, sleeping in doorways, depending on the occasional charity of strangers. She survived as she could, but her eyes still held an innocence that adversity had not managed to steal. At that moment, Connie, his housekeeper of 55, called for the 3rd time. The meeting with Evelyn could not wait, she insisted. Ted looked at Isabella, who had finished eating and was now watching him with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. "Do you trust me?" he asked, holding out his hand. Isabella looked at that large, strong hand, hesitated for a moment that seemed like an eternity, and then, slowly, placed her small hand on his. What Ted didn't know was that this simple gesture would forever change not only Isabella's life, but also his own, and that his sister Evelyn, upon discovering what he was about to do, would begin a silent war that threatened to destroy everything he tried to build. Ted drove his Escalade through the city with Isabella sitting quietly in the back seat, her small fingers gripping the seatbelt as if it were an anchor. The businessman watched in the rearview mirror as she seemed fascinated by every detail of the luxury car, timidly touching the leather seats, her wide eyes reflecting the lights of the dashboard. On the way to his mansion, he made a stop at a department store. The saleswoman initially looked with suspicion at the ragged girl, but it only took Ted to show his platinum card for the treatment to change completely. In minutes, Isabella was dressed in new clothes, dresses, shoes, pajamas, and everything else a child needed. Upon arriving at the mansion in the upscale neighborhood of Paradise Valley, Connie waited at the door, her brown face etched with concern. The housekeeper, who had taken care of the house for 15 years and had been practically a sister to Claire, was speechless when she saw the girl get out of the car. Isabella hid behind Ted's legs, frightened by the new environment. "For God's sake, Ted, what have you done?" Connie whispered as she watched the shopping bags being unloaded. Before he could answer, a shrill scream cut through the air. "Have you completely lost your mind?" Evelyn descended the mansion stairs like a hurricane, her heels clicking furiously against the marble. "First you miss the crucial meeting with the shareholders, and now you show up with that?" She pointed at Isabella as if the girl were an unwanted object. Ted felt his blood boil. "She has a name, Evelyn, and she is not that." His voice was controlled but carried an authority that made his sister take a step back. "Connie, please take Isabella to take a bath and then serve her something to eat." The housekeeper gently took the girl's hand, who was reluctant to let go of Ted. "Come on, sweetie. I'll prepare a warm bath and then make that cornbread that only I know how to make." Isabella's face lit up slightly at the mention of the cornbread, and she followed Connie upstairs. As soon as they were alone, Evelyn exploded. "You can't just pick up children from the street as if they were stray dogs. Have you thought about the legal implications, your reputation? What will others say?" "Others?" Ted laughed bitterly. "The same others who pass that girl every day and pretend she doesn't exist, who throw food at her as if she were an animal. I don't care what they think. But you should. You have a company to manage, an image to maintain. And since Claire—" She stopped abruptly when she saw her brother's expression harden. "Don't you dare use Claire in this discussion," he warned, his voice dangerously low. "She would be the first to bring this girl home." "Claire is no longer here!" Evelyn shouted, tears of frustration welling up in her eyes. "And you need to stop acting like the world ended with her. Do you have any idea how much work I do to keep the business running while you drown in self-pity?" Upstairs, Connie helped Isabella into the bathtub, trying to distract her from the shouts coming from downstairs. The girl trembled slightly, not from the warm water, but from the fear of being sent away. The housekeeper softly hummed an old camp song while washing. The little girl's hair, discovering under the dirt strands of golden brown. "You know, sweetie, the 4th of July is coming up," Connie commented, trying to create a bond. "Here in Scottsdale, it's the best celebration of the year. There are fireworks, parades, good food." Isabella listened attentively, her eyes beginning to shine with genuine interest for the first time. Meanwhile, in the office, Ted made frantic calls. Using his contacts, he discovered that Pam Sanders was admitted to a rehab clinic run by the city. Her condition was delicate: addiction to chemicals, episodes of disorientation, unable to take care of herself, let alone a child. The social worker he spoke to was clear. Isabella needed a safe place to stay while her mother recovered. Otherwise, she would be taken to a foster home. The mere mention of this possibility made Ted feel a pang in his chest. He knew the system well. Children entered and rarely left in better condition. When he finally went up to see how Isabella was doing, he found a scene that took his breath away. The girl was sitting on the bed in the guest room, wearing new unicorn pajamas, while Connie brushed her now clean and shiny hair. On the small table next to it, a plate of cornbread still steaming and a glass of warm milk awaited. "Uncle Ted!" Isabella's small voice called him, surprising him with the affectionate nickname. "Can I really sleep here?" He approached, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You can, yes, for as long as you want." The words came out before he could think about the implications, but something in his heart told him it was the right thing to do. What Ted didn't know was that, at that very moment, Evelyn was in her own office, making a call to a private investigator. "I want everything about Pam Sanders," she instructed coldly. "Every detail, every mistake, every dirty secret, and I want it fast." In the rehab clinic, Pam had one of her rare moments of lucidity. Sitting on her bed, she stared at a poorly drawn picture that Isabella had made weeks before everything fell apart. A house, a tree, two figures holding hands. A lone tear rolled down her face as she whispered her daughter's name. Back at the mansion, late at night, Isabella slept deeply for the first time in months, clutching a teddy bear that Connie had found in the attic. An old gift that Ted had bought for the son he and Claire never had. The businessman watched her from the door, feeling a mixture of protection and fear. How could he protect that fragile little soul from a world that had already been so cruel to her? Thunder rumbled across the Scottsdale sky, announcing one of those rare desert storms. Isabella stirred restlessly in bed, but did not wake up. Ted gently closed the door and walked to his room, where Claire's portrait watched him from the bedside table. "Help me do the right thing," he murmured to the photograph, knowing that the following days would require more strength than he imagined he had. The first rays of sunshine had barely filtered through the curtains of the room when Isabella woke up startled, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. For a moment, panic took over her small body until the aroma of fresh coffee and cornbread invaded her nostrils, bringing her back to reality. She was no longer on the streets. She was in Uncle Ted's house. She timidly descended the stairs, still wearing her unicorn pajamas, and found Connie in the kitchen preparing breakfast. The housekeeper smiled at her when she saw her, but her eyes were worried. The night before, after everyone had fallen asleep, she had found Evelyn rummaging through documents in her brother's office, muttering something about proving that this girl is a mistake. "Good morning, sweetie," Connie greeted her, placing a plate of huevos rancheros in front of her. "Did you sleep well?" Isabella nodded positively, but her eyes scanned the kitchen looking for Ted. "Uncle Ted had to leave early," Connie explained, noticing her restlessness. "He went to take care of some important things, but he'll be back soon." What she didn't say was that Ted had left at 5 in the morning for the rehab clinic, determined to better understand Pam's situation. At the clinic, Ted found a devastating reality. Pam was in a much worse state than he imagined. The 28-year-old woman looked twice her age, her body thin, and her mind confused by the effects of addiction. During a moment of lucidity, she recognized Isabella's name and began to cry compulsively. "My girl, my little one," she repeated, between sobs. I didn't want to abandon her, but after I lost my job, everything fell apart." The responsible doctor, Dr. Robert Anderson, a man with white hair and a tired expression, explained that the recovery process would be long. "She has frequent relapses, Mr. Mitchell. Even if she shows improvement, she will not be able to take care of a child for a long time." Meanwhile, at the mansion, Isabella began to open up little by little with Connie. The housekeeper took her to see the garden, where an old oak tree provided generous shade. It was there that she discovered the girl's talent for drawing when she began to scribble on the ground with a stick. "You like to draw, don't you?" Connie asked, observing the surprisingly detailed strokes that appeared on the ground. Isabella nodded, focused on her work. "At school, before, the teacher always praised my drawings," she murmured. The mention of school made Connie think. Isabella would need to go back to school, but how? Without documents, without a formal record of where she was living, everything would be more complicated, and there was also the problem of the other children. How would they react to knowing where she came from? The sound of heels on the stone path interrupted her thoughts. Evelyn approached, dressed impeccably in a grey tailored suit, her eyes fixed on Isabella like a hawk targeting its prey. "Connie, I need you to go to the grocery store," she ordered dryly. "Now!" The housekeeper hesitated, her protective instinct screaming not to leave Isabella alone with that woman. But an employee could not disobey a direct order. With a heavy heart she got up. "I'll be back soon, sweetie. Keep drawing, okay?" As soon as Connie disappeared, Evelyn sat down on a garden bench, her expensive perfume suffocating the natural aroma of the flowers. "So, Isabella, you know you can't stay here forever, don't you?" The girl froze, the stick still suspended, in the air. Evelyn continued, her voice falsely sweet. "My brother is just being nice, but he has a busy life, important business. He can't be taking care of a child who isn't even family." Tears began to form in Isabella's eyes, but she bravely held them back. Evelyn smiled, pleased with the effect of her words. "Besides, your mother, well, let's just say she doesn't have a good reputation in the city. Did you know that she was fired for stealing? That's right, she's a thief." "That's a lie!" Isabella shouted suddenly, surprising even herself with her courage. "My mom is not a thief." Oh, already showing your true colors." Evelyn stood up, dusting imaginary dust off her skirt, just like her mother, it seems. At that moment, a car parked at the entrance to the mansion. Ted got out, carrying several bags, and was paralyzed when he saw the scene. Isabella huddled near the oak tree, tears running silently down her face, while Evelyn smiled with satisfaction. "What did you say to her?" His voice thundered through the garden. Evelyn shrugged, maintaining her artificial smile. "Just the truth, dear brother. Something you seem to have forgotten since that woman left." The indirect mention of Claire made Ted move threateningly towards his sister, but he stopped when he heard a frightened sob from Isabella. He took a deep breath, controlling his anger. "Go inside, Evelyn. We need to talk, now." In the office, the discussion was explosive. Ted discovered that his sister had hired a detective to investigate Pam. "Don't you see?" Evelyn argued, throwing a folder on the table. "She was fired for theft. She's an addict. And that child, who guarantees that she doesn't have the same flaws as her mother?" "Enough!" Ted slammed his hand on the table so hard that a photo of Claire fell, the glass of the picture frame shattering on the floor. The noise seemed to awaken something in him. He bent down to pick up the photo, his fingers trembling slightly. "Do you remember what Claire always said?" he asked, his voice now dangerously calm. "The true character of a person is revealed, not in what she does for equals, but for those who are different. Look at yourself, Evelyn. What have you become?" His sister recoiled as if she had been slapped. "Don't you dare judge me, Ted. I'm not the one throwing away years of hard work because of a street kid." Outside the office, Connie, who had returned from the grocery store, held Isabella in her arms. The girl trembled, not from fear, but from a deep sadness that seemed too great for her small body. "Come on, sweetie," the housekeeper whispered. "I'll show you something special." She took her to the kitchen, where she took a drawing notebook and a box of colored pencils out of one of the shopping bags. Isabella's eyes widened. Are they for me?" "Of course they are." Connie smiled, stroking her hair. Now you can draw as much as you want, without having to use the dirt from the garden. As Isabella began to draw, her small tongue appearing. In the corner of her mouth in concentration, Connie watched in amazement. On the paper, the portrait of a family gradually emerged. A girl holding hands with a woman who could only be Pam, and next to them, two figures that looked a lot like Ted and Connie herself. In the office, the discussion continued, but Ted had already made his decision. No matter what Evelyn or anyone else said, he would not abandon Isabella. He picked up the phone and called his lawyer. I need you to prepare the documents for temporary custody, he instructed, and I also want a complete investigation into Pam Sanders' dismissal from the shoe factory. Something in this story isn't right. What he didn't know was that his decision would trigger a series of events that would forever change not only his life and Isabella's, but would also reveal secrets long buried in the prosperous city of Scottsdale. The week that followed brought significant changes to the Mitchell mansion. Ted, determined to give a normal life to Isabella, began to reorganize his routine. For the first time in 3 years, since Claire's passing, he returned to having breakfast. At the kitchen table, where Isabella now sat timidly, her little feet swinging without reaching the floor. The mornings gained a new dynamic. Connie prepared huevos rancheros, pastries and fresh juices, while Ted read the newspaper and occasionally peeked over the pages to see Isabella drawing in her new notebook. The girl had a natural talent. Her drawings, although childish, captured surprising details and complex emotions that a 6-year-old would normally not be able to express. One of those mornings, Ted received a call that would change the course of events. It was his lawyer, Dr. Paul Miller, with news about the investigation of Pam's dismissal. Ted, there's something very strange about this story. The lawyer's voice sounded worried. The factory claims she was caught stealing material, but there's no police report, no concrete evidence, nothing. And what's more, I've found other similar cases in the last 5 years, all young women, all fired for alleged thefts. The businessman felt his stomach churn. Keep investigating, Paul. I want to know everything about these firings, especially who was in charge when they happened. Meanwhile, in the garden, Connie was teaching Isabella to plant sunflower seeds. The housekeeper discovered that practical activities helped the girl to open up, to talk about her feelings. You know, sweetie, these seeds are like people, she explained, placing a seed in the freshly dug earth. They need care, love, and patience to grow strong. Isabella absorbed every word, her little hands dirty with soil, as she carefully planted each seed. Aunt Con, she asked suddenly, using the affectionate nickname she had created for Connie, why doesn't Aunt Evelyn like me? The question took the housekeeper by surprise. How to explain to a 6-year-old the complexities of jealousy, prejudice, and the fear of losing control? Oh, my flower, sometimes people have difficulty understanding love. They think it's like a cake. If you give a piece to someone, there's less left for others. But true love is like these seeds. The more you plant, the more it grows. At the rehab clinic, Pam was showing signs of improvement, although she still had moments of confusion. During one of Ted's visits, she managed to maintain a more lucid conversation. Mr. Mitchell, she held his hands tightly, her eyes filled with tears. How is my Isabella? Does she ask about me? Ted felt a lump in his throat. She's fine, Pam. She's safe, studying, drawing a lot. And yes, she talks about you every day. It was true. Isabella always included her mother in her drawings, always asked when she could see her. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, Pam continued, her voice choked. After I lost my job, it was like a black hole had swallowed me. I tried other jobs, but the bad references from the factory haunted me. And then... She stopped, trembling slightly. And then what, Pam? Ted insisted gently, realizing there was something more to that story. The supervisor, Rick Miller. She whispered the name, as if she feared the walls could hear her. He said I could have my job back if... Pam couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Ted understood perfectly what had happened. Back at the mansion, he found a scene that momentarily took his breath away. Isabella was at the piano in the living room, the one that had remained closed since Claire's passing. Connie was beside her, teaching her to play a simple children's song. "Look, Uncle Ted," Isabella exclaimed excitedly when she saw him. "Aunt Con is teaching me to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." Her small fingers awkwardly touched the keys, but there was so much enthusiasm on her face that Ted felt his eyes sting. It was at that moment that Evelyn burst through the front door, accompanied by a social worker. Sarah Jones, a middle-aged woman with a severe expression, carried a thick folder under her arm. "Ted," Evelyn announced with a triumphant smile. "Miss Jones came to assess the situation. It seems that keeping a child without formal documentation is a pretty serious matter." Panic took over Isabella instantly. She ran behind Ted, clinging to his legs as she had done on the first day. Connie stepped forward protectively, but Ted gestured for her to remain calm. "Ms. Jones," he said, his voice controlled, "I'm glad you came. Just today I received important news about the case of Pam Sanders, Isabella's mother. Information that, I believe, you'll want to hear before making any decisions." The social worker adjusted her glasses, clearly not expecting that answer. "Mr. Mitchell, understand that it's not just about the mother. We need to assess whether this environment is suitable for a child. If there is emotional stability, family structure—" "Family structure?" Evelyn interrupted. "He's a widower who can barely take care of himself. And that woman," she pointed at Connie, "is just a maid. What kind of family is that?" The comment caused a heavy silence in the room. It was Isabella who broke it, her voice small but firm. "Uncle Ted and Aunt Con take care of me. They're my family now." The simplicity and truth of that statement touched everyone present in different ways. Sarah Jones made some notes in her folder, her face softening slightly. Evelyn turned red with anger, and Ted felt something inside him completely transform. "Ms. Jones," he said, bending down to be at Isabella's height, "I'd like to show you something." He picked up the girl's drawing notebook and began to flip through it. "These are her drawings from the last few days. See how she portrays her life here, her hopes, her fears. This is not a neglected or unhappy child." The social worker examined the drawings with professional attention, occasionally asking soft questions for Isabella, who responded with increasing confidence. Evelyn watched the scene with growing despair, seeing her plan fall apart. "Well," Sarah Jones finally spoke, closing the notebook, "it's evident that there's a lot of love in this house. Irregular or not, this environment is doing well for the child. However," she made a significant pause, "we need to regularize this situation. You have 1 week to start the process of temporary custody." When the social worker left, Evelyn remained, trembling with anger. "You won't get away with this, Ted. I swear you won't." "Enough, Evelyn," Ted replied, his voice carrying an authority that did not admit contestation. "From today, you are removed from the administration of the gas stations. I'm going to take back full control of the business." "You can't do that," she shouted. "I own as much as you do." "I can and I will. And I suggest you think very carefully about what you've been doing. Because I've also discovered some interesting irregularities in the accounting during your management." Evelyn paled. Without saying anything else, she grabbed her purse and left, slamming the door hard enough to make the pictures on the wall shake. That night, after Isabella went to sleep, Ted and Connie sat on the porch, sharing coffee and the weight of the day's events. "You know what's most ironic?" Ted commented, looking at the stars that dotted the desert sky. "Evelyn always said I was lost since Claire left. But for the first time in 3 years, I feel found, Connie smiled, understanding perfectly. In the room above them, Isabella slept, hugging the teddy bear, a soft smile on her lips. In her drawing notebook, open on the bedside table, a new drawing showed a large house with a garden full of sunflowers and 4 figures holding hands. She, her mother Ted and Connie, all smiling under a bright sun. What none of them knew was that Evelyn, at that very moment, was making a call that would drastically change the course of events. "Rick, it's Evelyn Mitchell. We need to talk about Pam Sanders and about how my brother is sticking his nose where it doesn't belong." The morning began hectic at the Mitchell mansion. It was Isabella's first day at her new school, a moment that mixed anxiety and hope. Ted had managed to enroll her in St. Mary's, one of the best educational institutions. In Scottsdale, after long conversations with the principal, Mrs. Davis, and presentation of the provisional documentation, Isabella was standing in front of the mirror in the room, nervously adjusting the ribbon bow that Connie had placed in her hair. The new uniform, with the navy blue pleated skirt and the white blouse with the school emblem, seemed to make the girl look even smaller than she already was. "Uncle Ted," she called softly when she saw him standing at the door, "what if the other children don't like me?" Ted knelt before her, lovingly adjusting the collar of her blouse. "You know what Claire always said?" he asked, surprising himself by mentioning his late wife without feeling the usual pang of pain. "She said that special people are like stars. They shine by themselves no matter the darkness around." In the kitchen, Connie had prepared a special breakfast. Breakfast burritos filled with cheese, warm cornbread and orange juice from the tree that grew in the backyard. As they ate, the housekeeper discreetly placed a package next to Isabella's plate. "What's this, Aunt Con?" the girl asked, her eyes shining with curiosity. "Open it and find out, sweetie." Inside the package was a new pencil case decorated with small hand-painted sunflowers. Connie had spent hours the night before preparing the gift. Along with the pencil case, a little note said, "For you to draw your dreams at school too." Isabella hugged Connie so hard that she almost knocked over her juice. The moment was interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. It was Sarah Jones, the social worker who had promised to accompany Isabella's first day at school. "Good morning," she greeted formally, but her eyes softened when she saw Isabella. "Ready for the big day?" On the way to school, in the back seat of the car, Isabella held her new backpack tightly while looking out the window. Ted watched her in the rearview mirror, noticing how she seemed simultaneously anxious and determined. At the entrance to the school, other children arrived accompanied by their parents. Some looked curiously at the unusual group, the elegant businessman, the social worker with a serious expression, and the small girl who seemed to want to hide behind her backpack. The principal, Mrs. Davis, a 60-year-old lady with grey hair, always tied in an impeccable bun, came personally to greet them. "Welcome, Isabella," she smiled gently. "Let's see your new class." Before Isabella followed the principal, Ted bent down to give her a last hug. "Remember," he whispered in her ear, "you are stronger than you think." The day would be long for everyone. Ted could barely concentrate on his meetings, constantly checking his cell phone to see if there was any news from the school. Sarah Jones remained at the school throughout the morning, discreetly observing the girls' adaptation. What no one expected was that during recess, an incident would change everything. Emily, one of the girls in the class, approached Isabella, who was sitting alone drawing. "Is it true that you used to live on the street?" Emily asked bluntly, in the direct way that only children can be. "My mom said she saw you asking for money outside McDonald's." Isabella froze, her pencil suspended. Over the paper, other children began to approach, curious about the conversation. Panic began to take over her, her hands trembling slightly. It was then that something unexpected happened. Instead of running away or crying, Isabella took a deep breath and did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She started drawing. With quick and precise strokes, she drew a small girl, alone, but with a bright star over her head. Around the girl, she added other people, some turning their faces, others extending their hands, and in the center of the drawing, a tall figure with a gentle smile. "Yes, I used to live on the street," she said finally, her voice low but firm. "But now I have a family. And did you know that everyone can need help someday?" Emily was silent, watching the drawing with fascination. Other children approached, asking to see better. "You draw very well," exclaimed a boy named Kevin. "Can you teach me?" When Sarah Jones passed by the yard minutes later, she found Isabella surrounded by a small group of children, all drawing together. The social worker smiled, making a positive note in her folder. Meanwhile, in the main office of Mitchell Gas Stations, Ted faced his own battle. The audit he had requested on the company's accounts began to reveal worrisome irregularities during the period that Evelyn was in charge. "Mr. Mitchell," the accountant explained, pointing to several spreadsheets, "we found a series of suspicious payments to a consulting firm, all approved by your sister." Ted frowned, examining the documents. The company in question, RCM Consulting, had as its main partner Rick Miller, the same supervisor who had harassed Pam at the shoe factory. His phone rang. It was his lawyer, Dr. Paul Miller, with news about the investigation. "Ted, you're not going to believe what we found. RCM Consulting is involved in a much larger scheme. They have links with several companies in the region, always with the same pattern. Young women are fired under false accusations, and then the company hires the consulting services." "Blackmail," Ted murmured, the pieces falling into his mind. "They force women into vulnerable situations and then profit from it." At that moment, Connie called. Her voice was tense. "Boss, there's something you need to know. I found some documents in Miss Evelyn's room when I went to clean. They're payment receipts for that factory supervisor from before Pam was fired." Ted's blood ran cold. His own sister was involved in the scheme from the beginning. But why? What would be her motivation? The answer came in the form of an old photograph that fell from one of the folders he was examining. In it, a young Evelyn smiled next to Rick Miller at a company party more than 20 years ago. On the back, a message. "Forever yours, Rick." The sound of heels in the hallway announced Evelyn's arrival. She entered the room like a storm, throwing a folder on Ted's desk. "Since you want war, little brother, let's have war. I have proof that you're using company money to support that street kid. The board won't like that at all." Ted stood up calmly, showing the photo he had found. "Interesting you mention evidence, Evelyn, because I've also found some very interesting things about you and Rick Miller." His sister's face paled. Where did you find that?" "The question isn't where I found it, but what I'm going to do with everything I've discovered. You're not only involved in a harassment and blackmail scheme, you're using our company to launder your dirty money." "You don't understand," Evelyn exploded. "Rick and I had plans. We were going to take control of everything, but then Dad chose you to run the company. You who have always been the favorite, the perfect one. And then came that Claire, involving you with ideas of charity and goodness." "So that's it?" Ted interrupted, his voice full of disappointment. "All this hatred, all this evil, is because of a failed love from 20 years ago." Before Evelyn could answer, Sarah Jones entered the room. Behind her, Isabella proudly held a piece of paper. "Uncle Ted," she ran to him, completely ignoring the tension in the environment. "Look what I drew at school today." The drawing showed a classroom full of smiling children, and in the center, Isabella, no longer alone but surrounded by new friends. In the corner of the paper, a small note from the teacher. "Extraordinary ability to express and overcome." Ted felt his eyes tear up. There was proof that love and kindness would always overcome hatred and bitterness. Evelyn watched the scene with a complex expression, anger, confusion, and surprisingly a hint of regret. "Miss Jones," Ted said, without taking his eyes off Isabella's drawing, "I think I have some information you'll want to hear. About how certain people take advantage of vulnerable women in this city." The social worker adjusted her glasses, her face assuming a professional expression. "I'm all ears, Mr. Mitchell." Evelyn took a step towards the door, but Ted stopped her with a look. "Stay, sister. It's time to fix what you helped break." The afternoon sun came through the windows of the office, illuminating Isabella's drawing on the table. A new day was beginning in Scottsdale, and with it, long-buried secrets would finally come to light. The ceiling fan turned lazily in the meeting room of social services, where Ted had spent the last 4 hours detailing the scheme he had uncovered. Sarah Jones was not alone. Beside her, a team of social workers and a prosecutor meticulously noted each word. "So let me see if I understand correctly," said the prosecutor, David Allen, a middle-aged man with keen eyes behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Your sister Evelyn and Rick Miller maintained a scheme that targeted women in vulnerable situations?" "Exactly," Ted confirmed, passing another folder of documents. "They identified employees who desperately needed the job. Single mothers, women with sick family members, people in difficult financial situations. Rick would harass them, and when they refused his advances, they were fired under false accusations of theft. And then?" Sarah Jones prompted, her expression a mixture of horror and determination. "Then, RCM Consulting, Rick's front company, offered overpriced services to the companies involved. It was a way to launder the blackmail money and keep everyone quiet. My sister," Ted paused, the pain evident in his voice, "used our gas station network to facilitate these transactions." While the meeting unfolded in the city center at the Mitchell mansion, Connie tried to keep Isabella distracted. The housekeeper had transformed the kitchen into a small art studio, with papers, paints, and modeling clay spread across the table. "Aunt Con," Isabella asked, as she carefully molded a small sunflower out of clay, "why did Aunt Evelyn leave?" "She was crying when she left with that big suitcase," Connie sighed, carefully choosing her words. "Sometimes, sweetie, people need to step away to think about what they did wrong and learn to be better." In fact, Evelyn's departure had been much more dramatic than Connie had let on. After the confrontation in the office, she had returned to the mansion only to pack, her hands trembling as she threw clothes and personal belongings into a leather suitcase. "You don't understand, Connie," she had said when the housekeeper found her in the room. "I loved Rick. He was everything I had, my only chance to be happy. But Dad only had eyes for Ted. And then came that Claire, with her sweet smiles and her ideas of charity. And does that justify destroying the lives of other women?" Connie had asked, her voice full of disappointment. Evelyn had stopped for a moment, her hands suspended over the suitcase. "At first, I didn't know. Rick said it was just business, that no one was really hurt. When I found out the truth, I was already too involved, and then came the pride, the anger, the desire to prove that I could also be powerful." Back in the present in the kitchen, Isabella continued her art, now painting a colorful picture where several sunflowers pointed towards the sun. Connie watched in wonder as the girl managed to capture not only the shapes but also the feelings. In her creations, the phone rang, making both jump in surprise. It was Ted, his voice sounding exhausted but satisfied. "Connie, get Isabella ready. We're going on a special visit." At the rehab clinic, Pam was having one of her best days since the start of treatment. Her eyes, previously constantly clouded by confusion, now shone with renewed lucidity. When Ted entered the room with Isabella, she couldn't hold back the tears. "My girl, my little one," she whispered, opening her arms. Isabella ran into her mother's embrace, and for a few minutes the room was silent, filled only with the sound of stifled sobs and whispered words of love. Ted watched the scene with a heavy heart, thinking about how life could be simultaneously cruel and generous. "Pam," he said softly when mother and daughter finally separated, "I have important news to share with you." In the next few minutes, he explained about the investigation, about how her innocence had been proven, about how Rick Miller and his accomplices were being investigated. "You weren't the only one, Pam, but you'll be one of the last, I promise." The woman listened to everything with an expression that mixed relief and sadness. "You know," she said finally, "after I lost my job and no one believed in me, I started to doubt myself. I thought that maybe I really was all those things they said. That's when I started to use those substances. I wanted to forget. I wanted to disappear." Isabella, who was sitting on her mother's lap, hugged her tighter. "But now you're going to get better, right, Mom? You're going to come home?" The question hung in the air like a soap bubble, delicate and fragile. Pam looked at Ted, who nodded encouragingly. "The doctors say I'm progressing well," she explained to her daughter. "A few more weeks and I can start outpatient treatment, but—" She hesitated, biting her lip. "But what, Mom?" "But I have nowhere to go, honey. I lost our apartment. I lost everything." "About that," Ted interrupted gently, "I have a proposal to make." He explained his plan. The mansion had a guest house in the back, rarely used since Claire had passed. Pam could live there during her recovery, near Isabella, but with her own space to rebuild her life. "I can't accept," Pam protested, although her eyes shone with hope. "You've already done so much for us." "It's not charity, Pam. It's an opportunity for a fresh start, for all of us." He paused, carefully choosing the following words. "Besides, I'm restructuring the administration of the gas stations. I'm going to need someone with experience in management to supervise the financial sector." Pam's eyes widened. "But how do you know?" "Your resume. Before the shoe factory, you were a financial analyst, weren't you? With specialization in business management, even." Pam nodded, tears running silently down her face. "But who's going to trust me after all this?" "I trust you," Ted said simply, "and I know you won't let me down." At that moment, Isabella pulled something from her backpack, her drawing notebook. "Look, Mom, I made this today at school." It was a drawing different from all the others. It showed the Mitchell mansion, but with a new detail. The guest house, in the back, with 3 smiling figures on the door. She, her mother, and a sunflower growing between them. "It's our future, Mom," she explained with the profound simplicity that only children possess. "Uncle Ted said that sunflowers always look for the light, even on the darkest days, like us." Pam hugged her daughter again, unable to contain the emotion. Ted watched the scene, thinking about how Claire would be proud. She always said that the greatest transformations began with the smallest gestures of kindness. Outside the clinic, the sun began to set, painting the Scottsdale sky with shades of orange and pink. In the square in front, a cotton candy vendor passed by, his colorful merchandise dancing in the afternoon breeze. Isabella looked hopefully at Ted, who smiled and made a positive gesture with his head. "Shall we buy cotton candy to celebrate?" he suggested, taking the girl by the hand. "I think your mom would like one too." As they walked to the vendor, Isabella between them, holding one hand of each, Ted thought about how unpredictable life was. Only a few weeks ago he was a bitter man, lost in his own pain. Now, thanks to a little girl who had the courage to trust him, he was helping to rebuild not only one, but several lives. What he didn't yet know was that his own journey of healing was just beginning, and that the greatest challenges and the greatest joys were still to come. Dawn in Scottsdale brought with it a cool breeze that gently swayed the curtains of the guest house, now transformed into a welcoming home for Pam and Isabella. After 3 weeks of adapting to outpatient treatment, Pam was beginning to recover not only her health, but also her dignity. Every morning, she woke up early to have coffee with her daughter before Isabella went to school, a ritual that both came to value deeply. On that particular morning, while Connie prepared breakfast burritos in the main kitchen, Ted watched from the window of his office the interaction between mother and daughter in the garden. Isabella proudly showed Pam the sunflowers she had planted with Connie. The first flowers were already beginning to bloom, their golden petals shining under the morning sun. "It's amazing how things have changed, isn't it?" Connie's voice surprised him. The housekeeper had quietly entered the office, bringing a cup of the strong coffee he so appreciated. "Sometimes I wonder what Claire would say about all this," Ted replied, accepting the cup with a grateful smile. "She would say that you finally found your way back to the light," Connie spoke with the simple wisdom that characterized her. "But I didn't just come here to bring coffee. There's something you need to know." Connie's serious expression made Ted straighten up in his chair. The housekeeper took a crumpled envelope from the pocket of her apron. "I found this yesterday when I was cleaning the room that belonged to Miss Evelyn," she explained, handing the envelope to Ted. "I think she dropped it when she left in a hurry." Inside the envelope were a series of old photographs and a flash drive. The photos showed Evelyn and Rick Miller at different moments over the years, but one in particular caught Ted's attention. In it, the two were in front of a courthouse, smiling, she with a bouquet of flowers in her hands. "My God," Ted murmured, turning the photo over to read the date on the back. "This was 19 years ago. They got married in secret." "There's more," Connie said, pointing to the flash drive. "I managed to see the contents last night, after everyone went to sleep." Ted connected the device to his computer, and a series of documents began to open. They were emails, contracts, bank records, a whole history of the relationship between Evelyn and Rick, and how it had transformed into a criminal partnership over the years. "They didn't just get married," Ted said, quickly reading the documents. "Rick had a shell company in Evelyn's name. That's how they laundered the blackmail money." The sound of laughter coming from the garden interrupted his thoughts. Isabella had just thrown water from the hose at Pam, who was now running after her daughter, both laughing as if there were no tomorrow. "See," Connie smiled, pointing to the scene. "While some choose the path of bitterness, others find strength to start over." The phone on Ted's desk rang, making him look away from the window. It was Sarah Jones. "Mr. Mitchell," the social worker's voice sounded tense. "We need to talk urgently. Some complications have arisen." Half an hour later, Sarah was sitting in Ted's office, accompanied by the prosecutor, David Allen. Their expression was serious. "Rick Miller has disappeared." The prosecutor went straight to the point. "And before he disappeared, he made a series of serious accusations against you and Pam." "What kind of accusations?" Ted asked, feeling a knot in his stomach. "He claims that you and Pam planned all this together," Sarah explained, consulting her notes. "That you knew each other before, that you set up this whole situation to frame him and take control of the company." "That's absurd," Ted exclaimed, rising from his chair. "How can he—" "There's more," the prosecutor interrupted softly. "He presented documents that appear to show bank transfers from one of your companies to an account in Pam's name, dated before you supposedly met." Ted sat down again, stunned. "The documents are false. They have to be." "They probably are," Sarah agreed. "But until we prove that, we have a problem. The judge has ordered a complete reassessment of Isabella's situation." "What?" "No," Ted felt the panic grow. "She's adapting so well. She's happy. Her mother is recovering. And that's why we're here first," the prosecutor explained, "to give you time to prepare. The hearing will be in a week." After they left, Ted remained in his office, his head spinning with the implications of that news. That's when he noticed Something strange in one of the old photos of Evelyn and Rick, a detail in the background of the image that had initially gone unnoticed. "Connie!" he called, his voice urgent. The housekeeper appeared quickly. "Look at this. Do you know this? The place?" The photo showed, in the background, an old farmhouse. Connie adjusted her glasses, examining the image carefully. "I do," she replied after a moment. "It's the old Johnson farm, where the Miller family used to keep their important documents. It's about 25 miles from here on the old highway." "How do you know that?" "My sister worked there for years," Connie explained. "She always said that the Millers had a huge safe in that house, full of important papers." Ted felt a spark of hope. If Rick kept records of his illicit business, they were likely in that safe. In the garden, Pam was now helping Isabella make a flower crown with daisies they had picked. The girl chatted cheerfully about her day at school, about how her teacher had praised her drawings, about how happy she was to have her mother back. Ted watched the scene, feeling a fierce determination grow inside him. He would not allow Rick Miller to destroy that hard-won happiness. "Connie," he said, still looking out the window, "I need you to take care of them for a few hours. I have a visit to make." "You're not thinking of going to that farm, are you?" the housekeeper asked, worried. "I have no choice. If there's any proof of Pam's innocence in that place, I need to find it before the hearing." What Ted didn't know was that, at that very moment, a black car parked discreetly across the street. In the driver's seat, Evelyn watched the mansion with a tortured expression. Beside her, a folder full of documents waited to be delivered, documents that could change everything. In the garden, Isabella placed the newly made flower crown on her mother's head, declaring her queen of the sunflowers. Pam laughed, hugging her daughter tightly, unaware that her newfound happiness was about to face its greatest test. The sun began to set on the Scottsdale horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple. A gentle breeze swayed the sunflowers in the garden, their faces still turned towards the light, even as the shadows began to lengthen. It was as if nature itself was trying to say something, that even in the darkest hours, there is always a light to follow. The old road that led to the Johnson farm snaked through the desert like a sleeping snake under the afternoon sun. Ted drove his car cautiously, his eyes attentive to the faded signs and the references that Connie had given him. The GPS didn't work well in that remote area, and the last thing he needed was to get lost. As he drove, his mind returned to the conversation he had had with Pam before leaving. He had decided to be honest with her about the situation, about Rick's accusations, and about his trip to the farm. "Don't go," she had pleaded, her eyes full of worry. "Rick is dangerous. He may be expecting something like this." But Ted knew he had no choice. With the hearing approaching and the false accusations hanging over them, they needed concrete proof of Pam's innocence. At the mansion, Connie tried to maintain a normal routine for Isabella, who was focused on a new drawing. The girl had developed a special talent for portraying emotions in her works, and her latest project was a portrait of the family, including Ted, Connie, her mother, and, surprisingly, even Evelyn, although she was a little further away from the others in the drawing. "Why did you draw Aunt Evelyn like that, sweetie?" Connie asked softly, noticing how the figure was partially shaded in the drawing. Isabella continued coloring carefully while answering, "Because she's sad, Aunt Con. And sad people sometimes stay in the shadows until they learn to come back to the light." The child's innocent wisdom touched Connie deeply. It was at that moment that the doorbell rang, making both raise their heads. Pam, who was in the kitchen preparing a snack, went to the door. Outside was Evelyn. The silence that followed was dense as fog on a winter morning. Evelyn looked different. Her usual haughty demeanor had been replaced by an expression of weariness and something resembling regret. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice softer than anyone there had ever heard. Pam hesitated for a moment, but then stepped aside, allowing her former sister-in-law to enter. Evelyn carried a thick folder under her arm, and her hands trembled slightly. "Isabella," Connie called, realizing the tension in the air. "How about we go see if the sunflowers need water?" But before they could move, Isabella had already run to Evelyn, surprising everyone. "Did you come back from the shadows?" the girl asked innocently, making Evelyn blink in confusion. "How?" "In my drawing," Isabella explained, taking the paper. "From the table. You're in the shadows because you're sad, but everyone can come back to the light if they want." Evelyn looked at the drawing, and something on her face changed. Tears began to run down her cheeks, staining her impeccable makeup. "That's why I came," she said, wiping her face with the back of her hand, "to try to get back to the light." Meanwhile, at the Johnson farm, Ted finally found the old main house. It was an imposing building, although a little deteriorated by time, with large glass windows and a porch that surrounded the entire first floor. With his heart pounding, he parked the car and approached the entrance. The door was locked, but one of the side windows was partially open. After checking that there was really no one around, he managed to get inside. The interior of the house was a time capsule, with furniture covered in white sheets and a thick layer of dust on everything. Following Connie's directions, he headed to the office on the second floor. The safe was exactly where the housekeeper had said it would be, behind a painting on the wall. But how to open it? That's when Ted noticed something familiar in the decorative pattern around the safe. They were the same flowers that appeared in all the old photos of Evelyn and Rick. "Daisies," he murmured, remembering the bouquet his sister held in the photo of the secret wedding. He began to spin the dial of the safe, 5/13 to 2006, the date of the wedding he had seen on the back of the photograph. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside, there were several meticulously organized folders. Ted began to examine them one by one, his heart racing with each discovery. There were detailed records of all the schemes, including the false accusations against Pam and other women. But there was more, much more. Back at the mansion, Evelyn had just revealed the contents of her folder. "Rick not only forged documents against Pam," she explained, spreading papers on the living room table. "He's been doing this for years, and I helped. At first it was for love. Then it was for fear and shame." "Fear of what?" Pam asked softly. "Of losing everything. Of admitting that I had wasted my life on a man who never really loved me," Evelyn replied, her voice breaking. "But last night he went too far. He said he was going to destroy Ted completely, that he was going to have Isabella taken to a shelter." "That's why you came back?" Connie asked, watching the former boss carefully. "I came back because I finally understood what Claire always said about choices," Evelyn replied, looking at Isabella, who was still holding her drawing. "That it's never too late to choose the right path." At that moment the phone rang. It was Ted, his voice urgent. "Connie, call the police and prosecutor Allen now," he instructed. "I found everything. Not just the documents about Pam, but records of years of fraud, blackmail, and something else. Something that explains why Rick was so desperate to destroy us." "What did you find?" Connie asked, putting the phone on speakerphone. "I discovered why the shoe factory agreed so easily with the false dismissals. Rick wasn't just blackmailing the employees. He was embezzling money from the factory itself. Millions of dollars over the years, and he used the forged dismissals as a smokescreen to hide the embezzlements." A sudden noise made Ted stop speaking. Footsteps in the hallway of the farmhouse. "There's someone here," he whispered. "I need to—" The line went dead. At the mansion, everyone looked at each other in panic. It was Evelyn who broke the silence. "I know where he is," she said, standing up, "and I know what Rick is capable of. We need to get there." We can't leave Isabella alone, Pam protested. I'll stay with her, Connie offered. You go. And for God's sake, call the police. As Evelyn and Pam ran to the car, Isabella returned to her drawing. With a blue pencil, she began to colour the sky over all the figures, including over Evelyn, removing the shadows that had previously surrounded her. Everything will be okay, won't it, Aunt Con? She asked, without taking her eyes off the paper. Connie hugged the girl, praying silently that she was right when she replied, Yes, sweetie, yes it will. The sun began to set as Evelyn's car sped down the dusty road towards the Johnson farm, with Pam beside her and a police car following closely behind. In the distance, dark clouds gathered, foreshadowing one of those rare desert storms. What none of them knew was that, hidden in a room at the back of the old farmhouse, Rick Miller held a folder with different documents that could completely change the course of that story, revealing a secret that not even Evelyn knew. The interior of the Johnson farm was plunged into shadows when Ted heard footsteps approaching. Quickly, he put the most important documents in his briefcase and looked for a place to hide. The office had few options, but there was an old filing cabinet large enough for one person. He had barely closed the cabinet door when the figure of Rick Miller appeared in the entrance to the office. The man looked different from the photos Ted had seen, older, more embittered, with deep circles under his eyes and an almost feverish look. I know you're here, Mitchell. Rick spoke to the apparently empty room, his voice echoing off the walls. I saw your car outside. Always so predictable. Just like your father. Ted held his breath. The mention of his father caught him by surprise. Do you know why your father hated me so much? Rick continued, walking slowly around the office. Why he never allowed me to get close to the family business, even after secretly marrying Evelyn. Outside the farm, Evelyn's car parked silently, with the headlights off. She and Pam got out in silence while two police cars stopped a safe distance away. We need to get in without him noticing, Evelyn whispered to Sergeant Davis, who was leading the operation. I know this house like the back of my hand. There's an entrance at the back, through the old kitchen. Inside the office, Rick had sat down in the old leather chair behind the desk, taking a worn folder from his jacket. Your father found out something about me, he continued, leafing through the documents. Something that happened long before I met your sister, an incident in my old town. That's why I came to Scottsdale, you know, to start over. But your father, that old man, always so righteous, he found out everything. Ted, inside the cabinet, tried to control his breathing while processing that information. What secret had his father discovered? Downstairs, Evelyn led the group through the dark kitchen, her steps careful on the old floorboards. Pam followed closely behind, her heart beating so loudly that she feared it could be heard. Funny how life comes full circle, Rick's voice continued in the office. Your father wanted to destroy me, but he ended up leaving before such a convenient accident on the road. Ted felt his blood run cold. The car accident that had taken his parents' lives. Had it not been an accident? But he made a mistake, Rick laughed bitterly. He left all the evidence against me well guarded, thinking that one day it would be found. Do you know where? The sound of footsteps on the stairs made Rick stop talking. He stood up quickly, taking something from his pocket. A small golden key. It's over, Rick, Evelyn's voice sounded from the office door. She was standing there, with Pam and two police officers right behind her. Rick smiled, but it was an empty, almost manic smile. Eve, my sweet Eve, you don't understand, do you? You never understood. I understand more than you imagine, Evelyn replied, taking a step forward. I know about the documents, about the blackmail, about how you used my love for your schemes. Love, Rick scoffed. You really think it was for love that I married you? It was all part of the plan. I needed to get close to the Mitchell family. Find out where your father had hidden that evidence. What evidence? Evelyn asked, her voice trembling slightly. The evidence that your dear father wasn't the upright man everyone thought, Rick replied, raising the small key. He found out about my past, yes, but instead of reporting me, he did something much worse. He blackmailed me. For years I was forced to divert money from the company to secret accounts abroad. Why do you think he got so rich so fast? Evelyn staggered, as if she had been slapped. You're lying. No, dear. For the first time, I'm telling the truth. And the evidence is all here on this farm. Your father had a very peculiar moral code. He kept evidence of all his sins, perhaps out of remorse, perhaps out of precaution. And when I found out where he was hiding them, thunder cracked outside, making the windows tremble. The approaching storm seemed to reflect the tension inside the house. You're surrounded, Rick, Sergeant Davis announced, stepping forward. It's over. Over? Rick laughed again. No, it's just beginning. With a quick movement, he threw the small key out. The open window. Good luck trying to prove anything now. It was at that moment that Ted chose to come out of his hiding place, holding his briefcase full of documents. We don't need your key, Rick. I found everything we needed in the safe. Rick's expression changed instantly from triumph to horror. Impossible. How did you? The date of your secret wedding with Evelyn, Ted explained. It was in all those old photos you kept so carefully. My sister has always been your biggest weakness, hasn't she? Even when you were just using her. Evelyn watched the scene with tears in her eyes, years of manipulation and lies finally revealing themselves before her. But you know what your biggest mistake was? Ted continued, opening his briefcase. Keeping not only the evidence of your crimes, but also documents that prove that my father tried to stop you. I found letters from him threatening to report you if you didn't stop the harassment and blackmail schemes. He wasn't your accomplice, he was your tormentor. Rick lunged towards Ted, but the police were faster, immobilizing him against the wall. You don't understand, he shouted while being handcuffed. Your father was no saint. He made mistakes, Ted interrupted, like all of us. But unlike you, he tried to fix them. I also found records of anonymous donations to all the families who were harmed by the company's first schemes. He was trying to do the right thing. Pam, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. That's why you were so angry when you fired me? Because I reminded you of all those other women that your scheme destroyed. Rick didn't answer, but his silence was answer enough. As the police led Rick away, the storm finally arrived, bringing with it a heavy rain that seemed to want to wash away years of secrets and lies. At the mansion, Isabella had fallen asleep on the couch, her drawing notebook still open beside her. Connie watched the girl with affection, noting how she had added more details to her drawing of the family. Now there was a rainbow over all the figures, including Evelyn. The phone rang, making Connie run to answer before she woke Isabella. Everything's okay, Ted's voice sounded from the other end of the line. It's over. But while everyone thought that was the end of the story, one last secret awaited to be revealed, a secret that was hidden not in documents or safes, but in the recesses of the memory of someone everyone had forgotten. The old housekeeper of the Johnson farm, Connie's sister, who had witnessed much more than anyone imagined. The rain continued to fall over Scottsdale when Ted, Evelyn, and Pam returned to the mansion. Connie waited for them on the porch, her face a mixture of relief and worry. As soon as they entered, she led them to the kitchen, where hot water for chamomile tea was already boiling on the stove. "Isabella?" Pam asked immediately, her eyes searching for her daughter. "Sleeping on the living room couch," Connie replied softly. "She spent all afternoon drawing and talking to my sister Josie." "Josie is here?" Ted asked, surprised. Connie's sister, the former housekeeper of the Johnson farm, rarely left her house on the outskirts of the city. She arrived shortly after you left, Connie explained, serving the tea in old porcelain cups. She said she needed to tell us something important. As if she had heard her name, Josie entered the kitchen. She was a 70-year-old lady with white hair tied in a simple bun and eyes that carried the weight of many untold stories. Her resemblance to Connie was remarkable, although her features were more marked by time and the desert sun. "Mr. Mitchell," she began, her voice firm despite her age, "I worked on that farm for 30 years. I saw a lot, things I kept in here." She pointed to her own chest, "because I didn't know whether to tell them or not. But today, when Connie called me telling me about everything that happened, I knew it was time to speak." Everyone sat down at the kitchen table, the sound of the rain creating a curtain of privacy around them. Josie took a sip of tea before continuing. "Your father, Mr. Augusto, was a complex man," she began, looking directly at Ted and Evelyn. "When he found out about Rick's past, he was furious, yes, but it wasn't just because of his old crimes. It was because he recognized Rick from a case that had happened years before, right here in Scottsdale." Evelyn leaned forward, her hands squeezing the cup tightly. "What case?" "Rick had another name before," Josie revealed. "He called himself Robert Carey. He worked for a short time at your father's first company, even before he started with the gas stations. He disappeared after an employee accused him of harassment. Your father tried to investigate at the time, but he had already disappeared." "That's why he changed his name," Ted murmured, "and came back years later, unrecognizable, to get close to our family through Evelyn." "Exactly," Josie confirmed. "But there's more. When your father finally recognized who he was, it was too late. Rick had compromising documents about old irregularities in the company, things that your father had done in the beginning when he was building the business." "What kind of irregularities?" Evelyn asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Undeclared loans, backroom deals, nothing compared to what Rick was doing, but enough to tarnish the reputation your father had built," Josie explained. "That's when the cat-and-mouse game between them began." Pam, who had remained silent until then, interrupted gently. "But how do you know all this?" A sad smile crossed Josie's face. "Because I cleaned the office every night. They thought I didn't understand anything, that I was just an illiterate maid. But I listened, and I saw. I saw your father, Mr. Augusto, crying alone after Rick threatened him. I saw the nights he spent trying to fix his old mistakes, making anonymous donations, helping families in need." Ted felt his eyes sting. The image of his father, always so strong and determined, crying alone in the office, was almost unbearable. "But there's one thing that no one knows," Josie continued, lowering her voice. "The night before the accident that took your parents' lives, your father called me into the office. He handed me an envelope and said, 'Keep this, Josie. One day someone will need it.'" With slightly trembling hands, she took a yellowed envelope from the pocket of her apron. "I kept it for all these years. I was waiting for the right moment." Ted took the envelope reverently. Inside was a handwritten letter from his father, dated the day before the accident. "My dear children, if you are reading this, it is because my suspicions have been confirmed and something has happened to me and your mother. Rick Miller, or Robert Carey, his real name, is more dangerous than I imagined. I discovered that he plans to use the company for a much larger money laundering scheme, using the forged dismissals as a smokescreen. Evelyn, my daughter, I know you love him, and that breaks my heart. He approached you only to have access to our family, to our business. I tried to protect you without revealing the truth, but now I see that this was my biggest mistake. Ted, you have always been more sensitive than you seem, more like your mother than me. Use that sensitivity to guide your steps. The company is not just a business, it's a way to make a difference in people's lives. I made mistakes in the past, it's true. In the beginning of the company, I made choices that I'm not proud of. But I've spent the last few years trying to fix each of those mistakes. The money that Rick thinks he discovered in secret accounts, these are funds that I created to help families in need, to create job opportunities, to do good without boasting. Don't let my mistakes or Rick's crimes destroy what we have built. Most importantly, don't let them destroy yourselves. With eternal love, Father. When Ted finished reading, the silence in the kitchen was broken only by the sound of the rain and the stifled sobs of Evelyn. "All these years," she murmured through tears, "I wasted all these years hating the wrong people, hurting those I should have protected." It was Pam who stood up and, surprising everyone, hugged Evelyn. "It's never too late to start over," she said softly. "Your niece taught me that." As if she had heard her name, a small noise came from the kitchen door. Isabella was there, barefoot, hugging her teddy bear, her eyes sleepy but attentive. "Mom! Uncle Ted! Aunt Eve's crying!" Evelyn quickly wiped away her tears, but not fast enough. Isabella had already run to her, holding out a piece of paper. "Here," the girl said, handing over one of her drawings. "I made it for you today. It's you with us in the garden, everyone together under the sun." The drawing showed exactly that. The whole family gathered among the sunflowers, including Evelyn, who was no longer in the shadows, but under a bright sun, smiling. "You know what Aunt Josie told me today," Isabella continued, her childish voice carrying a wisdom beyond her years, "that sunflowers are very smart flowers. Even when it's cloudy, they know where the sun is hidden, and they stay turned towards it, waiting for it to return." Evelyn looked at the drawing, at the little artist, at her brother, at Pam, her family, which she almost destroyed because of old grudges and a love that was never true. "I think," she said softly, "that I needed a 6-year-old to teach me how to find the sun again." Outside, as if responding to those words, the rain began to subside, and on the horizon, through the dissipating clouds, the first rays of the setting sun began to gild the Scottsdale sky. The week that followed the revelations was intense for everyone at the Mitchell mansion. The news of Rick Miller's arrest spread quickly through Scottsdale, generating a wave of consequences that no one had foreseen. Other women began to come forward, sharing similar stories of harassment and blackmail, not only from the shoe factory, but from other companies in the region. On one particularly busy morning, Ted found himself in his office, now transformed into a kind of operations center. Sarah Jones, the social worker, was sitting in front of him, reviewing a stack of documents. Prosecutor David Allen paced back and forth, talking on the phone, while Evelyn methodically organized a series of folders on a large table. 3 more confirmed cases, the prosecutor announced, hanging up the phone. All with the same pattern. Young women, difficult financial situation, fired under false accusations of theft. Evelyn made a note in her notebook, her face showing a mixture of determination and remorse. Since the revelations, she had dedicated herself entirely to helping with the investigation, using her knowledge of Rick's business to identify other victims. "The most impressive thing," Sarah commented, adjusting her glasses, "is how all this started because of a little girl on the sidewalk outside a McDonald's." As if invoked by the mention, Isabella ran through the office door, followed by 3 other children. They were her new friends from school, Emily, Kevin, and Ashley. In recent days, the mansion had been filled with life and childish laughter, something that hadn't happened in a long time. "Children, slower!" Connie's voice sounded from the hallway. The housekeeper appeared at the door, carrying a tray with juices and cookies. "Sorry, boss, but they're rehearsing for the school's summer fair performance." Ted smiled, gesturing for her not to worry. Seeing Isabella playing and behaving like a normal child was all he wanted most. In the garden, Pam supervised the children while they rehearsed an impromptu square dance. She herself was different, stronger, more confident. The outpatient treatment was going well, and she had begun to work part-time in the financial sector of the Mitchell gas stations, proving herself as competent as her resume suggested. "Mom, look!" Isabella called, twirling in her new gingham dress, which Connie had sewn especially for the summer fair. "The teacher said I'm going to be the bride." "In the square dance," Pam applauded, her heart overflowing with joy at seeing her daughter so happy. Whoever saw her now would never imagine that, only a few months ago, she was a scared little girl begging for money on the street. Inside the office, the meeting continued. "There's something that still intrigues me," David commented, leafing through some documents. "Why did your father keep all that evidence on the farm, Ted? Why didn't he use it to stop Rick?" It was Josie, who was helping to organize the files, who answered, "Because Mr. Augusto knew that it wasn't just Rick who needed to be stopped. It was a whole system that allowed people like him to thrive." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, interested. "The evidence he kept wasn't just about Rick," Josie explained. "It was about all the businessmen in the region who turned a blind eye to this type of abuse, who profited from the suffering of others. He was building a bigger case, wanting to change the whole system." Evelyn looked up from her notes, a sudden realization on her face. That's why Rick was so desperate to find those documents. It wasn't just about him. "Exactly," Ted completed. "And now we have the chance to finish what our father started." In the garden, a small commotion caught everyone's attention. Isabella had gathered her friends and, with Connie's help, was organizing an impromptu exhibition of her drawings. She had transformed the outer wall of the guest house into a gallery, hanging her works with colored ribbons. "Come see!" she called excitedly. "It's the story of our family!" Everyone left the office to see. The drawings told an impressive story. From the first sad days on the street to the moment Ted found her, the arrival at the mansion, Pam's recovery, and finally, Evelyn's transformation. The last drawing in the series showed everyone together, in the garden, surrounded by sunflowers in bloom. "This one is special," Isabella explained, pointing to a particular drawing. In it, there were two figures that no one had noticed before, a man and a woman watching the scene from afar, with gentle smiles. "It's Grandpa Augusto and Grandma, who I never met. Uncle Ted showed me pictures of them." Ted felt his throat tighten with emotion. Evelyn held his hand, silent tears running down her face. "Do you know what else Aunt Josie told me about sunflowers?" Isabella continued, oblivious to the emotional impact her drawings caused. "That they're like a family. They grow together, protect each other from the strong wind, and they all help the smaller ones find the sun." Sarah Jones took notes furiously in her folder, occasionally wiping her eyes behind her glasses. That demonstration of children's art was saying more about Isabella's recovery and adaptation than any formal report could express. "I think we have everything we need for next week's hearing," she commented to Ted. "It will just be a formality now." But there was still a surprise waiting for everyone. Connie approached Ted, holding an envelope that had just arrived in the mail. It was from the old shoe factory. "It's a proposal," she explained. "They want to partner with Mitchell gas stations for a re-employment program for all the women who were unfairly fired." Ted looked at Pam, who was now helping Isabella hang another drawing. "What do you think? Do you want to lead this project?" Pam stopped what she was doing, surprised. "Me? Who better than you to understand what these women need?" Evelyn interjected. "Besides, your financial reports have been impeccable. You have all the knowledge necessary." While the adults discussed the details of the new project, Isabella had started a new drawing. In it, the Mitchell garden expanded, becoming larger, with more sunflowers and more people smiling under the sun. "What's that, sweetie?" Connie asked, watching the drawing take shape. "It's the future, Aunt Con," Isabella replied simply. Uncle Ted always says that we need to dream big. The afternoon sun bathed the garden in a golden light, making the sunflowers look even more vibrant. The children returned to rehearse their square dance, filling the air with laughter and music. Ted watched everything, thinking about how his father would be proud to see what his family had become. But there was something in the envelope from the factory, a small detail that no one had noticed yet, that would once again change the course of that story. A name among the members of the board who had approved the partnership proposal, someone who had a surprising connection to the Mitchells' past, and who was about to reappear in their lives. The name on the envelope from the shoe factory caused an impact that no one could have predicted. Anthony Myers, the current chairman of the board, was not a stranger to the Mitchell family. In fact, he had been Augusto Mitchell's best friend in his youth, before moving to Los Angeles decades ago. His signature on the partnership document was no mere coincidence. On a particularly warm morning in June, while preparations for Isabella's school summer fair were in full swing, Ted received a call that left him thoughtful. "Ted?" Anthony's deep, familiar voice sounded from the other end of the line. "We need to talk. I'm returning to Scottsdale tomorrow. There are things about your father, about the factory, that you need to know." In the garden, oblivious to the tension that the call had caused, Isabella and her friends rehearsed the square dance under Connie's supervision. The housekeeper had transformed the space into a true fairground, with colourful flags intertwined. In the branches of the trees and a small makeshift stage next to the sunflower beds. "Aunt Con," Isabella called, adjusting the ribbon in her hair, "why are some sunflowers bigger than others?" Connie smiled, helping the girl with the bow. "Because each one grows in its own time, honey, just like us." Pam watched the scene from the porch of the guest house, where she organized documents for the new re-employment project. In recent weeks, she had interviewed dozens of women with stories similar to hers, all victims of Rick's scheme, all struggling to rebuild their lives. "It's not just an employment project," she explained to Evelyn, who had become a surprisingly dedicated partner in the initiative. "It's a chance to give these women back their dignity." Evelyn nodded, making notes in her agenda. She had changed deeply since the revelations about Rick. Her former air of superiority had given way to genuine humility and a sincere desire to repair the damage caused. "You know," Evelyn commented, looking at Isabella playing in the garden, "sometimes I think we need that innocence of hers to remind us of what's really important." Ted's arrival interrupted the conversation. His face was serious, worried. "Anthony Myers is returning to Scottsdale," he announced bluntly. "Uncle Anthony?" Evelyn asked, surprised. "But it's been years since we heard from him. Not since our parents' accident," Ted completed. "And now he says he has important information about Dad and the factory." "What kind of information?" Pam asked, sensing the tension in the air. Before Ted could answer, a joyful cry came from the garden. Isabella had managed to do a particularly difficult step of the square dance and celebrated with her friends. "Look, Uncle Ted, I did it!" She waved, her face radiant with pride. The automatic smile that appeared on Ted's face at seeing the girl's joy soon gave way to the previous worry. "Anthony arrives tomorrow," he continued. "He wants to meet us at our parents' old house. The Mitchells' old residence, a traditional house in Scottsdale's historic district, had remained closed since the accident. Ted and Evelyn never had the courage to sell it or even do a proper cleaning. It was as if time had stopped inside. The next morning, while Connie took Isabella to school, Ted, Evelyn and Pam headed to the address they had avoided for so long. Anthony Myers was already waiting for them on the porch, his hair completely white and his back slightly bent by the years, but his eyes still alive and perceptive as Ted remembered. "You've grown so much," he said with a choked voice, embracing the children of his old friend. "Augusto would be proud to see what you've become." Inside the house, the dust of years covered the furniture like a greyish cloak. Old photographs on the walls showed happy moments. Augusto and Anthony Young graduating from college, the early years of Mitchell gas stations, Ted and Evelyn as children. "Your father was a complex man," Anthony began, sitting in the old armchair that used to be his favorite place during visits. "When we started the business, we made mistakes. We were young, ambitious. Sometimes we cut corners to get what we wanted." He paused, taking an aged envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket. But Augusto, he never managed to live well with that. He started creating a secret fund to repair our past mistakes. That's when we met Rick, or Robert, as he was called. At the time, "Did you know who he was?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Not at first," Anthony replied. "I only found out after I moved to Los Angeles. When I tried to warn your father, he already knew. He was gathering evidence, not just against Rick, but against all of us, all who had been part of that dark period of the business. That's why Rick wanted so much to find those documents," Ted concluded. "It wasn't just about him." "Exactly," Anthony confirmed. "But your father did something that none of us expected. Instead of using the evidence to blackmail us or expose us, he created a plan of redemption." He opened the envelope, revealing a series of old documents. "This is the original project that your father developed for the factory. A professional training program, daycares for the employees, complete medical assistance. He wanted to transform that place into a model of social responsibility." "Why did that never happen?" Pam asked, leafing through the papers with interest. "Because Rick found out," Anthony replied heavily. "And he knew that if that project was implemented, his harassment and blackmail scheme would be impossible to maintain." A heavy silence fell over the room. Outside, the sound of children playing on the street seemed to come from another world, from another time. "But now," Anthony continued, a small smile appearing on his tired face, "you have the chance to fulfill your father's dream. The factory board unanimously approved the partnership with Mitchell gas stations. And I want to help." At that moment, Pam's cell phone rang. It was Connie, her voice agitated. "Come to the school now, you need to see this." When they arrived at St. Mary's, they found a small crowd gathered in the courtyard. Isabella was in the center, along with her friends, but they weren't just rehearsing the square dance. The girl had organized an impromptu exhibition of her drawings, but this time it was different. Each drawing told the story of one of the women that Pam had interviewed for the project. Stories of struggle, of overcoming, of hope. And next to each drawing, there was a real sunflower planted in small colored pots. "She spent all week preparing this," Connie explained, emotional. "She said she wanted to show that all stories deserve light." The principal, Mrs. Davis, approached the group, visibly moved. "Isabella told us about your project with the factory, and then she had this idea, to use the summer fair to present these stories to the entire school community." Anthony Myers watched everything with teary eyes. "Impressive how sometimes we need the innocence of a child to show us the way," he commented. Ted nodded, watching Isabella animatedly explain her drawings to a group of parents. "You know what's most amazing?" he said. "A few months ago, she was a scared little girl sitting on the sidewalk outside a McDonald's. Now she's helping other people find their own light." Pam hugged her daughter when she ran towards her, proud and happy. "Mom, look! Each sunflower has the name of one of the ladies you're going to help." Evelyn approached, carrying one of the pots. The sunflower inside it was smaller than the others, just beginning to bloom. "And this one?" she asked softly. "What's the story behind it?" Isabella smiled, that smile that lit up her whole face. "This one is special, Aunt Eve. It's for you, because you're also starting over, aren't you?" The tears that Evelyn had been holding back finally fell. There in the middle of the schoolyard, surrounded by sunflowers and children's drawings, She finally understood what her father had tried to teach her all those years ago. That true strength is not in controlling or hurting others, but in having the courage to start over and help others do the same. But while everyone celebrated that moment of unity and hope, no one noticed a figure watching from afar, partially hidden behind a tree. Someone who still had one last card to play, one last secret to reveal. A secret that could shake the foundations of that newly rebuilt family. St. Mary's Summer Fair promised to be a memorable event. The schoolyard had been transformed into a true fairground, with colourful flags crossing the sky and typical food stalls spread all over. The aroma of cornbread, roasted corn, and funnel cake mixed with the perfume of the sunflowers that Isabella and her friends had planted. But not all the festive joy could completely dissipate the tension that hung over the Mitchell family. On the morning of the fair, Ted found a mysterious envelope in his mailbox. Inside it, there was only an old photo and a handwritten note. Not all secrets have been revealed. Meet me at the old chapel on the Johnson farm before the fair. Come, alone. The handwriting was familiar, but it wasn't Rick's, who remained detained. Ted studied the photograph carefully. It showed his father, Augusto, much younger, next to a woman he didn't recognize. They smiled, and the woman held something in her arms, partially hidden by the shadow of a tree. Is something wrong? Pam's voice surprised him. She was at the office door, beautiful in a blue gingham dress that she had bought especially for the fair. It's nothing, he replied, quickly putting the envelope in his drawer. But Pam knew him too well now to believe that excuse. Ted, she said softly, after everything we've been through, do you really think you should face whatever it is alone? Before he could answer, Isabella burst into the office, twirling in her new dress. Connie came right behind, trying to attach a rebellious ribbon to the girl's hair. Uncle Ted, look! Aunt Con made it just like the bride's dress in the square dance, she exclaimed, her eyes shining with excitement. Ted's heart clenched at seeing the girl's genuine happiness. How long had it been since that afternoon at McDonald's? It seemed like a lifetime. You look beautiful, sweetie, he smiled, but his eyes met Pam's, who was still watching him with concern. In the garden, Evelyn supervised the final preparations for the fair. She had taken over the organization of the event as part of her redemption process, transforming it into a celebration not only of the summer fair, but also of the re-employment project. The women on the project will have their own stalls, she explained to Anthony Myers, who had stayed in town to follow the developments. It's a chance to show their talents, to start their own businesses. Josie, who helped with the organization, watched everything with a knowing look. Something in the atmosphere of that day made her uneasy, as if she could feel a storm approaching in a seemingly clear sky. Connie, she called her sister discreetly, did you notice anything strange about the boss's behavior today? The housekeeper nodded. He's worried about something, but he doesn't want to tell us. Just like his father used to be, remember? The two sisters exchanged meaningful glances. They had witnessed many secrets of the Mitchell family over the years, and they recognized the signs that something important was about to happen. In the early afternoon, as everyone prepared to go to school, Ted made an announcement. I need to take care of something before the fair. I'll meet you there. I'm going with you, Evelyn said firmly, surprising everyone. Whatever it is, I'm not going to let you face it alone. Neither will I, Pam added, her voice not admitting any argument. Ted looked at the two women, his sister and the woman, who had become much more than just Isabella's mother, and knew that he had no choice. What about Isabella? He asked, still trying to find a way to protect them. She'll go with Connie and Josie to school, Pam replied. She needs to prepare for the square dance anyway. On the way to the Johnson farm, Ted finally showed the mysterious envelope to Evelyn and Pam. His sister paled at seeing the photo. "My God," she whispered, "it's her." "You know the woman in the photo?" Pam asked, surprised. "Not personally," Evelyn replied, her voice trembling slightly. "But I found some photos of her among Dad's old things. There was a letter too, but I never managed to understand it completely." "What letter?" Ted asked sharply. "Why didn't you ever tell me about this?" "Because it was right after Rick appeared in our lives," Evelyn explained. "He convinced me that it was better not to meddle in the past, that some things should remain buried." The old chapel at the Johnson farm appeared ahead of them, its stone walls covered in vines. The place had an abandoned air, but someone had been there recently. There were fresh tire tracks in the dirt. "I don't like this," Pam murmured, watching the broken windows of the chapel. "It feels like a trap." "It probably is," Ted agreed. "But we need to know. That woman in the photo, there's something familiar about her that I can't explain." They entered the chapel together, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the old walls. The interior was surprisingly clean, as if someone had prepared the place for that meeting. At the altar, a figure awaited them. It was an elderly woman, her white hair tied in an elegant bun, her hands resting on an old wooden box. "Finally," she said, her voice surprisingly strong for someone her age. "I thought I'd never have the courage to do this, but after seeing that little girl, her kindness, her strength, I knew it was time." "Who are you?" Ted asked, although something in his heart already knew the answer. "My name is Claire Myers," she replied, looking directly at him. "I'm Anthony's sister, and I was also very close to your father." Evelyn stepped forward, her eyes wide. "The letter, was it yours?" Claire nodded slowly. "Yes, dear. And now, after all these years, I can finally tell the truth about that photo, about your father, and about what really happened on the night of the accident." Pam, realizing the magnitude of the moment, held Ted and Evelyn's hands. Outside, the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. At the school, Isabella must have been preparing for her presentation, unaware that at that very moment one last secret was about to be revealed, a secret that would forever change the history of the Mitchell family. Claire opened the wooden box, revealing a stack of yellowed letters and old photographs. "Sit down," she said softly. "It's a long story, and you need to know everything before the fair starts." The air inside the chapel seemed to grow denser, laden with the weight of decades of secrets about to be revealed. Through the broken windows, one could hear in the distance the sound of summer fair music. The celebration was starting at the school. But there, in that abandoned chapel, time seemed to have stopped, waiting for the moment when the last piece of the puzzle would finally fall into place. The silence inside the old chapel was almost palpable as Claire Myers began to carefully remove the letters and photographs from the wooden box. Her hands, marked by time but still firm, organized the documents as if she were assembling a complex puzzle. "I met your father in 1975, she began, her voice laden with emotions long suppressed. "I was a nurse at the only hospital in Scottsdale at the time. Augusto had just started his business. He was still just a young entrepreneur with big dreams." Claire picked up one of the photographs, showing a very young Augusto Mitchell, smiling next to a newly opened gas station. "He had that sparkle in his eyes," she continued, "a determination to make a difference in people's lives. It wasn't just about business for him." "But what about the woman in the photo I received today?" Ted asked, his voice betraying his anxiety. Claire smiled sadly. "That woman is me, Ted, and what I'm holding in my arms." She paused, taking a deep breath. "Is a child, a girl." Evelyn brought her hands to her mouth, beginning to understand. Pam squeezed Ted's hand tighter. "Your father and I fell in love," Claire continued. It was an impossible love from the beginning. He was already engaged to the daughter of an important local businessman, an arranged marriage that would guarantee the future of his business. When I found out I was pregnant— Wait, Ted interrupted, his voice trembling. Are you saying that? The girl in the photo was my daughter. Our daughter, Claire confirmed. Your half-sister. The impact of the revelation hit the Mitchell siblings like a wave. Evelyn leaned against one of the old columns of the chapel, while Ted remained still, processing the information. What happened to her? Pam asked softly, being the only one able to find her voice at that moment. Mariah, Claire replied, the name coming out like a prayer. I gave her the name Mariah. Augusto helped financially, always discreetly. She grew up knowing that her father had another family, but she never tried to make contact. She understood the complexity of the situation. Where is she now? Evelyn asked, finally regaining her voice. Claire's face contorted in pain. Mariah graduated in social work. She dedicated her life to helping children in vulnerable situations. Her voice faltered for a moment. She found out about the accident that killed Augusto and his wife. She went to the funeral discreetly, from afar. No one recognized her. Why are you telling us this now? Ted questioned, still trying to absorb everything. Claire stood up, walking to one of the broken windows of the chapel. In the distance, the lights of the school's summer fair shone in the night that was beginning to fall. Because Mariah had a daughter, she replied, turning to face them. A girl who, by an irony of fate, ended up on the streets of Scottsdale after my daughter became seriously ill and could no longer take care of her. Ted's heart stopped for a moment. Beside him, Pam let out a small sigh of understanding. Isabella, she whispered. Claire nodded, tears running silently down her wrinkled face. My great-granddaughter, the granddaughter that Augusto never knew he had. The revelation hung in the air like an infinite echo. Suddenly everything began to make sense. The instant connection that Ted felt with Isabella that afternoon at McDonald's, the girl's talent for drawing that so reminded Augusto in his youth. Even the way her eyes shone with determination, exactly like those of the grandfather she never knew. Mariah is in a hospital in Los Angeles, Claire continued. The treatment is difficult, but she's fighting. When I found out that Isabella had found a home with you, Ted, it was as if the universe was fixing something that had been broken for so long. Why didn't Rick ever use this information against us? Evelyn asked suddenly. He seemed to know all the family secrets. Because he never knew, a new voice replied from the entrance of the chapel. It was Anthony Myers, who had followed the group discreetly. Only Augusto and I knew. It was a secret we promised to take to the grave. But the accident, Ted began, a terrible suspicion forming in his mind. It wasn't Rick, Claire interrupted, understanding his concern. The accident was really an accident. Augusto was on his way to Los Angeles that night. He was going to meet his newborn granddaughter, finally gather the courage to tell everyone the truth. At that moment, the sound of fireworks exploded in the sky, announcing the official start of the summer fair. Through the windows of the chapel, they could see the colorful lights illuminating the night. Isabella is performing, Pam reminded softly. She's the bride in the square dance. Ted looked at Claire, then at the photo in her hands. The image of his father young, smiling next to the woman he loved in secret, holding in his arms the daughter he could never publicly acknowledge. Come with us, he said, holding out his hand to Claire. It's time for your great-granddaughter to meet her whole family. In the schoolyard, the fair was in its heyday. Colorful flags danced in the night breeze. The aroma of typical foods filled. The air and the sunflowers that Isabella had planted seemed to shine under the festive lights. When the group arrived, the square dance was about to begin. Isabella, beautiful in her summer fair bride dress, looked anxiously for her family in the crowd. Her eyes lit up when she saw Ted, Evelyn, and her mother, but it was the white-haired lady next to them who captured her attention. There was something familiar about that lady, something in her smile that seemed a mirror of her own. The music began, and Isabella took her place in the square dance. As she danced, her steps light and graceful, Claire couldn't hold back the tears. There was her great-granddaughter, dancing in the same yard where her daughter Mariah had studied so many years before. "Look," Connie whispered, pointing to the sky. Above them, among the colourful explosions of the fireworks, a full moon shone brightly, and around it a halo formed a perfect rainbow, a rare phenomenon that seemed to bless that moment of reunion and redemption. When the dance ended, Isabella ran to her family, her coloured ribbons fluttering in the wind. Claire knelt to receive her, opening her arms as she had done so many years before for Mariah. "Who are you?" Isabella asked, her curious eyes studying the lady's face. "I'm someone who has many stories to tell you," Claire replied softly. "Stories about sunflowers that even separated always find their way back to the light." Isabella smiled, that smile that lit up her whole face, the same smile of Augusto Mitchell in the old photo. "Just like in my drawings?" "Yes, my sweetie," Claire replied, embracing her great-granddaughter for the first time. "Exactly like in your drawings." Ted watched the scene, his heart overflowing with emotions. Beside him, Pam and Evelyn also cried silently. Connie and Josie exchanged knowing glances. They who had witnessed so many chapters of this story without ever revealing their secrets. In the center of the yard, among the sunflowers that she herself had planted, Isabella began to dance again, this time pulling Claire by the hand. Soon everyone joined the dance. Ted, Pam, Evelyn, Connie, Josie, Anthony, a family finally complete, finally free from the secrets that for so long had kept them apart. And up there, the moon continued to shine, its colourful halo embracing all of Scottsdale, as if the sky itself was celebrating that long-awaited reunion. The sunflowers in the garden, even in the darkness of the night, kept their faces turned towards the light, exactly as Isabella had said, always finding their way back home. 3 months later, Mariah was discharged from the hospital in Los Angeles. When she arrived at the Mitchell mansion, she found her daughter running through the garden that was now filled with sunflowers in bloom. Isabella had insisted on planting one for each member of the family, including a special one, the largest of all, for grandfather Augusto, who, even without knowing it, had ensured that his family would one day be reunited. And so, under the strong sun of the Arizona desert, the sunflowers continued to grow, their golden petals reminding everyone that, even in the most complex stories, there is always room for new beginnings, forgiveness, and above all, love.